And so it's all about those learnings, because after each learning, that's when we get those revelations, those realizations. We create that space where we have that opening, and then we can just keep going and keep going and follow and create more space for us to follow our intuition. And we can't do that without making mistakes, right? Because that's where we have to have those learnings in order to do that.
So I love that outlook, and that's one of my favorite books of all time. I just want to let you know I mean, it's one of those books when people ask what I should read or what they should read, I'm like, you should give this a chance.
Yes.
Because when I heard about it or learned about it, I didn't know anything, so I just read it completely blind, and all of a sudden, I'm like in my brain, I'm like, I think he's talking about this. I think, and then
Yeah.
by the end of it, without giving it away, it's like, okay, this makes so
Yeah.
much sense to me, and it's again, I fully agree with that. It's just it's part of the journey. Join me, Jeremy Swick, on Into the Unknown, a podcast that delves into the personal journeys, stories, and experiences of individuals across diverse professions. As a historian by trade, I firmly believe that our personal histories shape our present and offer valuable insights into our paths ahead. With that being said, let's get into it. On this episode of Into the Unknown, I am joined with a very special guest, Vanessa Ferlaino. How are you doing today, Vanessa?
I am doing very well. Thank you. How are you? How are you?
I'm doing amazing. I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. I look forward to talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here.
One of the ways I love to kick off the show is just talk about the importance of networking and just, I think, the way we can grow community, the way we can grow our businesses, our brands, our stories, and our message is through networking. So, how are we connected?
We are connected through Ace Branding, I believe. Yeah, really grateful for that connection. They've been absolutely phenomenal and fantastic and really helping me build my brand. So I'm super grateful for their support. And I know that they've always been able to give me great people that I'm able to share my story with and talk to people and really offer new perspectives. And so I know that we'll have a really great conversation today.
They do a great job. I've had a few of people there on my show, and again, it's just building that network, and they do a great job. So I look forward whenever they send someone my way, and it's always a good conversation.
Absolutely.
I want to jump in and just ask you, what is that comic book issue number one, your origin story? Who are you?
That is a great question. I would say who I am is a humanitarian, is what I tend to say. But I like to emphasize the human part. I think we kind of live in this conditioned society where we're sort of told we have to be this person and this person only. And so I personally have found that to be a big struggle, considering, I'm an award-winning author. I have my own show as well, which was an Amazon indie podcast amplifier. I have my own foundation. And so there's just all these multiple parts of me. And sometimes I don't know if there's any one that I fit more, that I'm more defined by. I think I've just sort of accepted that these are all the parts of me and they manifest in all these different forms. And so that's kind of what I really strive to encourage everybody. I think that we can be more than just this one defined thing. We're fluid, we're human beings, and we can move between all these different parts of ourselves in all these different ways. And so that's why I like to define myself as a humanitarian, because at the end of the day, everything that I do is to really, I hope, inspire people to just, really revisit our own inner humanity and our own outer humanity and see how that manifests in the world around us.
And I think it's so important. I think it goes back to the idea of authenticity. I think
Mm.
too many times we feel like we're forced in a mold. I need to be a sports historian. I need to be this. I need to be that. I can't be both. There's no intersectionality. And as we know, as humans, that is never, ever the case. I'm just thankful we're in a time period where that I think has been more out in the open, more acceptable, and more understanding. While it's not all the way there yet, it's sharing the human story, if you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think authenticity is the key part. And I think that the truthfulness, and I would also say, I think intentionality, I think to have our intentions and set our intentions is one thing, but then to embody our intentions, I think that can be sometimes a bit of a challenge. It can be hard when we have all this other stuff. We just kind of walk through the world and everyone's kind of throwing their stuff at us, and we all have our own lived experiences. And so I think it takes a lot of awareness, a lot of mindfulness to really um, be able to stay truthful in that intention, right? To really body our intention, and then to also give ourselves that grace to be flexible when we have to be, to just, honor our experiences without hoping it's not at the expense of somebody else's. And so they can sometimes be a bit of a balancing game, but I totally hear that.
Vanessa, I couldn't agree more. I think so much of life in general, once you start working on yourself and mastering who you are as a person, I think that makes life a lot easier. My background's education. I still remember being in the classroom and wondering why students acted specific ways, and I think it goes larger to humanity in general. You start to realize there's a variety of learners, everyone picks up on things different. And so the text message I always say that you received, you might have received it completely different than someone else who maybe has had past experiences where something bad's about to happen, whether maybe it's just, oh hey, I'm going to be 20 minutes late for the podcast, or hey, I can't come and get coffee today. It's all about those experiences, and I think channeling those waters.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, and I think too, one thing that comes up for me when you say that is around trauma. Obviously, we all experience different types of trauma. I'm a certified mindfulness meditation guide on the Inside Timer app, and so I've gone through different training, and the idea of I love mindfulness teacher training because it's very much, how are we holding space with people. And so at the end of the day, like, we all experience trauma, but we all experience different types of trauma. In these spaces, we actually have like big trauma and little trauma. But at the end of the day, when we come back to this big idea of we're all human beings, like, we all experience the same things just in our own contexts. And so how does that actually connect us? And that was actually the idea around my first book, Human. It's won a couple awards. I'm really excited. I'm actually now moving towards a second release of the book. So that'll be dropping sometime in September. I'm really excited about it. I've been doing all the writing and we're heading into editing soon. But it's that, is that whole idea is that we all experience the world. We experience the same thing. We all know grief, pain, loss, joy, happiness, excitement, etc. But we just experience it in our own context. And so how does this connect us? But sometimes I don't think we're really aware of that. And so that was the intention behind Human, is to really remind us of that we have the same human experiences. We feel the same things just in our own lived context. So how can that connect us?
Vanessa, I love that. And congratulations on your book, both the first edition and then the one that's coming out. What got you into that? What made you decide to become a writer?
I think that, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Just even the way that that's phrased is like, I'm not sure I ever had a thought that I was like, I'm going to be a writer. I don't think that ever really happened. I think it was just a very organic evolution of my own journey. I've experienced a lot of trauma, and there was a point in my life where I sort of found myself in this place of needing stillness, and I wasn't really sure how to do that. And so I actually went to acting training. I went to acting school, and the acting school that I went to, they actually used a lot of mindfulness techniques. They used lots of meditation to help you, get into character. And one thing that really resonated with me in acting school was, kind of to what you were saying at the beginning, like, we're human beings, we all are our own instrument, essentially. And so the more you can, you were talking about like the more you know yourself, but in acting, it was like, if you're your instrument, the more you know your instrument, the better you can play it, essentially. Right. And so that was my introduction into mindfulness. And then one of the activities there that we had to do was journaling. And so journaling was like a huge component in my training. And that was something that I just continued after I did the school for a while. I did a few different types of courses. I did improv, which was a lot of fun. I did more. I did improv, then there's like your intro, and then I also did one that was more around like long form visualizations and meditations to really like get into character and staying into character. And then how do you like gracefully exit a character. But then I continued journaling after acting school, and then that's where Human came from. It kind of came from that as I had these observations of myself, and then also I think being able to see yourself evolve through journaling. Right, there is a certain point where, at the beginning, there was a lot of trauma. I had to really release a lot of it. And then I got to a certain point where I started realizing how redundant I was becoming, but it was not because I was like, oh, redundant and there was shame. It was like, it was redundant because I'd outgrown that. You can start to see the pieces of yourself that you outgrow. And that's where Human came from. So now I started seeing, because my inner world was changing, my outer world was also transforming. And so these observations of, oh, actually, we all go through the same things just in our own context. Those were real revelations that I had, and that's where human came from. So it really came from the evolution of my journaling and my observations of the world, and the impact of inner transformation and inner healing, to really say, hey, what is the power of our inner healing, and how it can shape humanity. And that's where that all came from journaling.
I think so. An important thing I want to touch on is the fact that you're outgrowing your old self, and I think so much of that. I
Mm.
think it can be scary when you first start to get to that point. You start maybe seeing a change in how you view maybe your friends, your family, and you still have love for them. And maybe it's not talking to them every day; it's talking to them once a week. Because I think it's easy to say you can cut people out of your lives. It's a lot harder to actually do it. I think sometimes it's as you're working on yourself, you're realizing patterns or things maybe you don't enjoy as much as you once did, and finding ways to navigate while, as you mentioned, giving yourself grace and knowing that it's life is clearly not a linear path. It's a lot of zigs, a lot of zags, and a lot of doubling back around because you maybe didn't get it right the first time, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, um, when you start to hear your inner dialogue, right? And that can be very kind of scary as well, because, for me, one of the things that I really heard was my inner dialogue that was related to abandonment. It's not even, I think it's scary, but it's scary because it's sad. When suddenly I could hear, I was like, oh my God, do I actually think that about me? Like, no, I don't. But that's just how trained and conditioned we can be sometimes. And so things like those types of fears, like abandonment, shame, when I started realizing and hearing, that's my inner dialogue. Because that's what happens, right? When you start learning about yourself, and when you start redeveloping your relationship with your true self, you start separating, what's mine and what's not mine. And so suddenly you kind of can hear these two different voices, because you have space. You've created this in space, the space inside you to hear these things, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, did I think that? Yeah, I did, but that's not actually mine. And so to realize, oh, at one point in my life, I believe that about myself, is very hard, And so there's like a whole release that comes with that. But I think it just comes back to holding space with yourself and being able to say, you know what, that's allowed to be here for whatever reason. Sometimes that reason doesn't even matter. One of the reasons I struggled with Western psychology was that I felt there was too much of a rabbit hole at a certain point, that it was like, I'm not sure if I need to know the why every single time. Sometimes I can just sit here and be like, you know what? Just part of the lived experience, and this is allowed to be here for whatever reason that it's here, and I'm going to hold space with it. And then as everything rises, everything falls again, and you just kind of have to be patient and really hold that grace. But yeah, that was a huge thing for me, was just being able to hear my inner dialogue sometimes. Wow, like that can really open up a whole new level of just healing.
Vanessa, I love that you mentioned that holding space and giving space because, as you mentioned, so much of that voice you hear in your head is not actually you. It's things you've been said enough times where you believe it, or you start really analyzing and you're like, oh, that doesn't even make sense. That's nothing like me. I don't believe that at all. But, XYZ told me that so many times, or they've kind of continued, or they continued as a child or whatever, that this was part of me. And you start realizing, okay, maybe that wasn't true, and okay, I can live here, but it's not does not define me.
Exactly. Exactly. It's allowed to be here, but this is not who I am. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's sort of, I've started to really adopt this perspective of like, that's just this part of me, and that part of me is still allowed to be here, right? I can't neglect that part of me, because that would just be like neglecting, and that would be even worse, right? That would be fueling more abandonment. So it's more like, that part of me is allowed to be here. I'm going to hold space with that part of me. I'm going to nurture that part of me. I'm going to, feed myself compassion and love, but that's not who I am. That doesn't define me. And I think that's really important. I think it's important for people to remember too, that we're not defined by our traumas. That was something that I really had to understand, or maybe not understand. I think it's easy to logically understand, but again, to embody something, right? It takes time to heal, to release, to revisit, to reflect. And so I think I would definitely want to add that to what you're saying.
You mentioned that obviously you didn't set out to write a book, and it kind of started from journaling. So from journaling, when did it really become a book, or how did that process work?
Um, I have to go back in time a little bit. It's been about 5 years since I wrote it. And I think that's kind of part of I think the intention with the publisher is sort of doing like a legacy project where we revisit every 5 years and kind of reflect back and say, what have we learned about humanity, about being human, et cetera, et cetera. But I think a lot of it really, I think a lot of it, so the way the human is written is it's written in a very, it's written in a very truthful way. It's first person, but it's like an unnamed protagonist, and it's intentional because my intention in writing was I wanted you as a reader to go through it and read it as if these were your experiences, and so you were having these learnings at the same time, and then in a way for you to also kind of apply it back to your realities as well, like taking these reflections and then going back into your worlds and going, oh, how does this do I see similar things? Do I not, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would say that a lot of the experiences that are in human, a lot of the realizations are almost like straight out of the journal. But it is written in a way, it's like narrative nonfiction, right? So it's all real stories, real truths, real revelations, which I could probably find some of those that are word for word in my journal. And then, just kind of revamped, not revamped, but just rejigged and like reordered just to be able to tell a story.
In everyone's journey, everyone's path, they hit a fork in the road. They can go east, they can go west. They make a decision, not really knowing the outcome. When was that for you?
Oh my. I mean, I feel a lot of my life was just that, I've started to really adopt a new perspective of just life and just realizing I think life is life. This is just a pathway. This is the pathway. There's never I don't know if there's ever one pathway. I think the only guarantee we ever really have in life is death. And I think that sounds kind of morbid, and it's not intended to be, though. If you actually, Buddha, for example, really talked a lot about death, and there are a lot of Buddhist practices and a lot of his original Buddhist transcripts actually talk about like visualizing death, essentially, and because it's why we have life. We have life because we have death. But I think I don't think there's any, when I reflect back on my life now, and the perspective that I kind of choose to take is I'm not sure if there's any, I don't think there's any part of my life or any event that I would weigh more or less. I just think that this is now life. These are things that happen. And I say that as someone who's experienced extensive trauma. I'm including like sexual assault, including, very harmful relationships. I kind of look back at my life and I'm like, you know what? I think it is what it is. Life is life. This is just part of life. And, I don't think that you have to experience things like sexual assault to experience trauma, right? I don't, and I think that kind of goes both ways. And so I don't know if I can say I've had, tons of forks in the roads, tons of times I've had to make different choices. But I'm not sure that, again, I don't weigh any of them less or more. I just think that it's life, and every decision that was made based on what I knew at the time. And so, or what I believed at the time. And I think part of being patient with ourselves is understanding, if I maybe do something that does not align with me, I can always figure it out and either go backwards or, go back to that point, or I can go another way, right? Like we're never really stuck. Any fork in the road always leads us to something else, which leads us to something else. And we always have more choices after that.
I think so much of it is with the information you have in front of you. I think at the end of the day, as humans, we're all trying to make the best decisions that we know. That might mean from, a bird's eye view, that's probably a terrible decision I just made. But I maybe through what I know at that exact moment and in my thought process, I made this decision hoping or thinking it was the best outcome. And maybe it wasn't. But again, as you mentioned, doing it with the best intention or with the best amount of information you have at that given moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about uh, what you have at the moment. And also, I mean, I think if we kind of take a bird's eye view, like you said, of just life in general, it's about the learnings, right? One of my favorite books is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and it's really beautiful because it's that message that it's just like there's the hand, the only person that really knows is the hand, which could be spirit, God, the universe, whatever you want to call that. For me, it's the universe. For me, it's spirit, and I think it's true, right? That it's like there's a plan, and we all have to just kind of do the best that we can. And so it's all about those learnings, because after each learning, that's when we get those revelations, those realizations. We create that space where we have that opening, and then we can just keep going and keep going and follow and create more space for us to follow our intuition. And we can't do that without making mistakes, right? Because that's where we have to have those learnings in order to do that.
So I love that outlook, and that's one of my favorite books of all time. I just want to let you know I mean, it's one of those books when people ask what I should read or what they should read, I'm like, you should give this a chance.
Yes.
Because when I heard about it or learned about it, I didn't know
Mm.
anything, so I just read it completely blind. And all of a sudden, I'm like, in my brain, I'm like, I think he's talking about this. I think, and then
Yeah.
by the end of it, without giving it away, it's like, okay, this makes so
Yeah.
much sense to me. And it's again, I fully agree with that. It's just it's part of the journey.
Yeah. No, it's a great book, and it's one of those books that I reread every so often, and it always comes up for me in a particular moment, where it's always like there's a very particular learning that I have, or a grander like opening up, and then it's like, oh, got to revisit that book again just to kind of fill that up again. You know what I mean? Just to get my fill again. But it's a great book. I love it so much.
Out of curiosity, what are you reading right now? I assume you're somewhat of a reader.
Yes, what am I reading right now? So right now I'm actually reading The Truth About Immigration, and it is by Zeke Hernandez, and he is actually a professor, a business professor at Wharton School, and he's actually coming on my show, I think, next week. So I'm reading his book. I got an advanced copy of it, and yeah, super super pumped. It's really fascinating. It talks a lot about well, the truth of immigration, and talking a lot about how it's beneficial to society, how immigration is beneficial to society. But he does it in a way where, I think there are two kind of narratives around immigration in society, and I think he does it in a way where he's trying to really tell the truth, of it. Instead of just filling these narratives, it's really, really showing how it actually does more than just like create jobs, so it's really good. It's actually really good so far. I've read the first couple chapters. But yeah, that's what I'm reading right now. I also read Osprey Oriel Lake's The Stories in Our Bones, a phenomenal book. Um, talks a lot about, it really weaves in a lot of like indigenous types of stories, and really talks about kind of collective healing as well. So, in a really beautiful way, weaves in all these different concepts like the military complex, gender-based violence, sustainability and climate change, and really talks about how a lot of these things are connected. But she does it, as she goes through her story and her journey, and it's a really phenomenal book. I really enjoy that one as well. So I encourage people to anyone who's like socially conscious and really interested in just how do we move through our lived experiences, and how do these lived experiences impact humanity, the greater good, society. I really really recommend that one.
Vanessa, I appreciate that. I was born in Guatemala and I was adopted, came to the States at a very, very young age. And I think part of that, and part of being an actual historian, is learning more about your own history. And through that, you can learn about other people's histories. And I think you learn
Mm.
that it's all connected. We want to say it's all separate, but borders really are kind of a social construct for the most part, and so everyone's history is kind of spill over all over the place, and good, bad, indifferent, and just life ways, I guess.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love this point of division as well. Yeah, you're right. Like that's all conditioned. We're not actually divided. We're conditioned to believe division exists, that we're different, we're this and that, and we're not. We're humans. We're all the same. We're here for a reason, and I think we need to honor that better. We need to hold space with each other better. That's where my foundation came from, was this idea that we leverage community engagement and mindfulness in arts and culture. We bring these together to say, how can we hold space together, and kind of what you're saying, right? How can we honor cultures of how can we honor each other's cultures, how can we hold space with each other, and how can this translate into the greater good for society? And I really, yeah, I really think we need to be very mindful of what we consume through media, what we consume through social media. And I think that we have a really unique opportunity to create a much better society. But we're not told that. We're told this is the way it is and that's it. But I don't know if we realize we actually kind of co-create the conditions of society. We have a lot more power than we are told or than we're allowed to have as individuals in society.
What is your foundation called, and how can people learn more about it?
The Being Human Foundation, and you can just go to my website, vanessaferlaino.com, and you'll see everything there, from my foundation to the mindfulness stuff, to the book. You can subscribe to my newsletter there as well, so that to stay in touch when the release of the book is coming out.
So, Vanessa, title of the podcast, Into the Unknown. I think I have an idea of what you're working on right now, but can you kind of share the process of re-releasing a book?
Yeah, absolutely. This one's been interesting because I think I mentioned earlier, we're looking at this as kind of like a legacy project. So every 5 years we kind of revisit the book. So it's sort of written as a bit of a reflection. But I would say it's tough. It really is. The first time I reread Human, and so I was actually approached last year to rewrite. And when I first rewrote Human, it was very hard to read because, there were just so many things in there that I don't want to say that were wrong or even that I disagree with, but it's just like, to be able to look at this and go, oh, I can see where I was at that point, is very hard, right? Because it just opens up a lot of things again. And so I had to close it, and I really had to like step back, and I don't even think I touched it for months again after that, because I was just like, I just couldn't. I was like, I don't want to see this part of me. That was how I felt. And I didn't like that I had that response. It's not compassionate. It's not, it's not nice, but like I had to sit with that, and I had to work through that. And I was like, okay. So, I picked it up again, and I would say the process is a lot more rereading than it has been actually writing. It's been a lot of just rereading, getting comfortable with what's in there, and really finding ways to hold space with that part of myself that wrote it. I think, I'm writing it right now. And so a lot of what we talked about around, for example, inner narratives and the inner dialogues, like I talk a bit about that. The other thing is, to realize when I look back and think of Human and where I was at that journey, like I actually thought I was like super advanced in my healing, but it was very ego based. It was like, oh, I'm so advanced. Like it was almost like entitlement. It was like, I'm like so entitled to like all the things because I'm so healed now. And like, to see that in me is hard because I'm like, oh, gross. Like, oh, Vanessa, but it's been a lot of just reconciling that and just holding space with that and being able to now say, okay, like now being able to see that how have I evolved, right? How has my inner humanity actually evolved? Healing is not the destination. Healing is the journey. And I'm not sure there ever is a destination. I think healing is something that we commit to. We commit to ourselves. We commit to our lives. We commit to our inner humanity. And then that reflects the outer humanity. And that is where the writing is going. It's a lot around, I talk a little bit about family relationships and Human as well. And revisiting that then and then revisiting it now, a lot of that has evolved and in a lot more of a truthful way. One thing I'm really trying to revisit is, compassion. I grew up with certain family dynamics where my compassion was actually contrived. And so it's even hard to see that. Like, it's like you can see me trying to be compassionate towards certain members of my family, but I'm like, oh, that's not even like real, because if I grew up in a circumstance where I had someone who was always inviting you in to feel sorry for them, you don't have real compassion. And so that's contrived, and then it's not truthful. And so it's very hard to like reconcile all these things. And so that's been the process. It's been a lot of rereading, reconciling, and then the writing has been the easiest because I don't like force it to write. I just kind of wait. And then I know inside, I'm like, okay, time for me to write this down now. You know what I mean? And then the writing part has been easy. It's kind of been telling itself, the story comes in pieces and doesn't really come linearly, but it comes in pieces. And then as you write, I can kind of order it the way that it makes sense because it's not being told in a linear way, right? It's kind of being more told thematically. So that's been the process so far. And then after that, you head into editing, and I always hate editing because it's hard. There are things that as a writer, sometimes when we say things, certain punctuation can say one thing, but then to an editor, it's something else. And then you end up arguing over commas, commas and periods. And I'm just like, you know what, whatever, do whatever you want. I don't care as long as the main point is there.
Vanessa, I appreciate all that answer. I mean, it makes me think of back in school with the red pen, and my paper's just been destroyed, and I feel like I was the worst writer to ever exist, even though I thought I did a pretty good job. But I went on like 7 run-on sentences, but the theme's there, the message is there.
Exactly. Exactly.
But I also want to say I appreciate your willingness to reflect on yourself. Doing a legacy project like that, I'm sure, is not easy. You wrote down in your first book pretty much, your journal, your life, your story, while sharing it with a little bit of a different narrative. But then to actually have to go back and reread that, and of course, there's things we think are silly, but also the more in depth things, having to analyze and reflect, and then of course respond for the next book. So I just wanted to commend you on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's definitely been a journey, but I'm grateful for any opportunity to hold space with myself and to evolve.
Well, Vanessa, I really look forward to seeing the book come out. I just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Grateful to be here.
That was another fun episode of Into the Unknown. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if it provides you any value or entertainment, I would love if you shared it with others, liked, subscribed, and really just help the podcast grow. Again, tell a friend, tell a foe, just anyone who might enjoy hearing some stories of people's own journeys and what got them to where they are today. Till next time.